Welcome back, everybody. It's Business Monday. Beautiful day in downtown Providence. Hope everybody had a great 4th. Want to thank my earlier guest, Charles Antone, from Buildings Enclosure Science, startup in Rhode Island. That's one of the fastest growing companies helping smart buildings get smarter. And also Deacon Patrick Moynihan Skyping in to talk about the Jeffrey Epstein case and Bob Kraft. Both being represented by the same attorney down in Florida. But the real reason why we're here is the money man, Gary Sasse. Cha-ching, 4th of July, what did you do? Hire your own special fireworks company, have jets fly over, 21 gun salute. What do the super rich do on the 4th of July?
I don't know what the super rich do. I know what I do. I was down watching my grandson play baseball.
And was that a successful trip?
Yes, oh yes. Yeah.
Excellent.
Excellent.
Let's start with the budget fight that emerged last week. The governor, on the last day that the budget was before her, did two seemingly contradictory things. She in her message on signing the bill, was quite vehement in criticizing the legislature and the changes that they had made. She charged that the budget was anti-economic recovery, that it was going to stymie the state's effort to improve the economy. She shot numerous arrows towards them, but yet she signed the budget. She could have either let it go through without signature, or she could have, if she felt so strongly, vetoed the budget. What are your thoughts on this sort of mixed message? Is it trying to have both at the same time?
Well, I hate to see what she would do to a budget she really didn't like.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I think it was a confusing, message. I think, like anything, there was a grain of truth in, what she said. And the grain of truth that I find is they did enact a new tax credit program, tax credit with insurance companies, that has proved to be highly risky. And so I think there were things in the budget she had every right to criticize. And you would expect that a chief executive would do that. There are other things that she criticized that I think without merit. One of her criticisms of the budget was that the General Assembly slowed down Commerce RI's tax incentive programs, economic development programs. Well, that's not completely true. The governor had asked that the Rebuild Rhode Island program authority be increased from $150 million to $250 million. They actually increased it to $200 million. They also gave the Fain Tower $25 million, worth of those credits outside of that line.
Outside of that $200 million. And if Fain had gone through, that would have gotten $15 million,
right,
accordingly.
And also, on the other side, they did something that I applauded. They included the sales tax exemption for materials as part of that cap. So when you look at that, it was a compromise. She didn't get wiped out. The program wasn't wiped out. Actually, there was growth. The growth was modest. The growth wasn't as much as she had wanted. So I think she overreacted to that. And then when she talks about the negative impact the Assembly budget had on economic development, she also neglects to remember that she imposed a bunch of tax increases that the business community was vehemently opposed to. And with one or two exceptions, the General Assembly did not choose to put additional taxes on business. So there's always a lot of stories in the naked city, and there's a grain of truth in what she says, but I think it was an exaggeration. I don't think you can say that the legislature passed an anti-business budget. They didn't pass everything the governor wanted. And I think there's reason to be skeptical about some of the tax incentives that Commerce Rhode Island uses. We put a lot of rebuild into residential properties and hotels. And there really hasn't been, that I'm aware of, there may have been internal reviews, and a kind of transparent review to say, okay, what are we getting? What's going to be the return on investment? So I think it was a little bit disingenuous to say my programs got wiped out. You didn't get everything you wanted in your programs. Some programs were limited. I think in one case they put money into the wrong program. They should take the blame for that. But it wasn't as bad as the governor claims it was on economic development.
The Speaker and the Senate President fired right back within virtually minutes, saying, listen, you had an anti-business, anti-taxpayer budget. It increased lots of fees and taxes. Secondly, your administration has hired relentlessly and has mismanaged a number of programs. I think they were intimating DCYF and some of the other more controversial programs that have come under scrutiny of House oversight. The tenor and the tone of their response sets up for a dysfunctional government and does not bode well for compromise and consensus and building a strategy to improve Rhode Island.
Well, each politicians have short memory, so if something comes up that they both can support in the future, I'm sure they will. But the General Assembly's budget had pro-business elements in, and to say it was not pro-business is an exaggeration. The General Assembly was the body that enacted the structural reforms to education system. That wasn't proposed by the governor. She just wanted additional spending for her Promise program and for pre-K, which they reached compromise. They did increase the number of slots by 250, 300 slots for universal, pre-K. So, it's kind of a bizarre game that both sides are trying to paint the other side as not doing things that reach compromise. They reached compromise on pre-K. The legislature did something the governor did not propose on site-based management of schools and curriculum frameworks. They didn't fund a Promise program, but clearly the data on the success of that program is in question. It's not clear how successful it's been at the community college level. So yes, pro-business elements, education. Now, as far as state government's concerned and the management of state government, the legislature has a point, but they need to also put their money where their mouth is. State government spending has grown too much under this administration. There have been, problems well documented at UHIP, well documented at DCYF. So there are management issues. But at the end of the day, and this is both on the legislature and on the governor, the structural deficit doesn't change. I haven't seen the final projections on the structural deficit, but I would be hard-pressed to think it's gotten better. So the Assembly passed a budget, continues the structural deficit. Governor submitted a budget, continue the structural deficit. And the one thing that you want to measure whether state government is adopting a fiscally sound, fiscally sustainable, and restrained, fiscally sound budget is, are they reducing the structural deficit? And the answer is no. The Assembly gets credit for pointing out the issue, but they didn't finish the game.
So a lot of kicking the can. We'll go to the Providence City budget in a minute. Let's jump over to schools. You go away, and Providence schools get rated arguably by researchers at Johns Hopkins in really almost a defying moment. This is the ultimate in embarrassment for the state of Rhode Island. The capital city schools are somewhere around the worst in the United States.
Worse than Newark.
Worse than Newark, but think about rural Mississippi. I mean, this is really, these are researchers who work all over the country, and the governor had a little bit of a slip of her tongue. First she said they told her it was the worst, then she said it was amongst the worst. Regardless, it's one of the worst school systems in the United States. There's no more hiding. We've seen RICAS scores. We've now had research by Hopkins. What's your thought process on this?
Well, my thought process is evolving. When I first heard about what was happening in Providence, I thought the city needed to take the initiative. They needed to propose charter changes, 2 charter changes specifically, one on electing school committee members and having the mayor serve as chairman potentially, the other on giving the school district in the city financial independence to the same degree schools in other parts of the state have that independence. Those are charter changes that are essential. You recognize also that we have a different enrollment here. Yeah, unless the scores would get a lot better if we did a lot better in our bilingual education, or whatever they call it right now. And that can't be done without resources. I thought we needed to focus like a laser on where the problems were. And that was sort of a kind of an incremental, approach that I thought, made some sense. And then you read the John Hopkins report, which I have, read parts of. And it is frightening. It's alarming. And if they are correct in their findings, then I think you have to move beyond my first reaction, which was an incremental approach, and talk about a state takeover. Now, when you talk about a state takeover, it's expensive. If you take over a district and you don't bring resources to bear, you're just moving the deck chairs around. Now, the argument some make is, well, we spent 18 or 19,000 per pupil. We have plenty of money to move around. Well, it's the old concept of fungibility. So what would you take money from to invest in areas where you're underinvesting? So it's not a dollar for dollar kind of
Let me
trend.
push back on a few of these things. First and foremost, our track record of taking over school systems by the Rhode Island Department of Education
Awful.
is horrific.
Awful.
It was done in Central Falls. All these promises were made. If there is a worse school system in Rhode Island, it is Central Falls. The RICAS scores are actually worse than Providence. Second, we wrote a story last week comparing middle school RICAS scores. Johnston, Cranston, Woonsocket, West Warwick, numerous school districts in the state of Rhode Island have very similar outcomes.
Right.
One last one. What Hopkins got at wasn't just the failure of education, but the failure of society. That quote, the Wall Street Journal picked it up. A young student says to the researchers, my favorite teacher, they urinated on her desk and no one did a thing about it. We've lost the boundaries of society. And that wasn't one statement, there were hundreds of those statements.
Well, let me go back to each of those points, because I was involved in the Central Falls takeover, and you're right. And throw Hope High School in there too. We
Sure.
we intervened in Hope High School.
Numerous times,
Well,
more than once.
We remember we set up schools within schools. That was the latest.
10 Sizer, Essential Schools.
That was the latest flavor of the day,
Yeah.
kind of thing. And that worked out as long as we were intervening with money. As soon as the interveners left, it went back. Okay, now, a couple of things. First on Central Falls, go through one to one. I was involved with the Sunland administration when Central Falls school system was taken over. And the theory that we had was that Central Falls couldn't even come up with the money to support it,
Yeah.
but we would take it over and it would become almost a model school system, because there was an elementary school, a middle school, and a high school, and RIDE would set up the trustees and would use it to demonstrate. RIDE dropped the ball, period, because the plan made sense. There's no guarantee of success, but it made sense. And RIDE dropped the ball. Now, what's to say RIDE won't drop the ball again? Fair question. The other districts that are not performing well, true, but you have to do things in controllable sizes, and there's a much more fundamental problem involved which nobody wants to address, and this is what set Massachusetts on the road to prosperity. In Rhode Island, there is no constitutional right to an enforceable education, and every politician in the state, we've been bringing this up for about 10 years right now. I go back with Buddy Cianci in a lawsuit in 1982, I think it was 82, maybe 90, no, maybe 91, when Judge Needham, said that our school aid formula wasn't meeting the tests of constitutionality, and the Supreme Court said, well, kids in Rhode Island don't have a right to an education. That's what the legislature says it is. So until you make that kind of change where parents and communities can take action to protect their kid, we let prisoners at the ACI sue when they think they're not being treated appropriately or constitutionally, not our kids. It makes no sense. And so I see a lot of hypocrisy in that we're going to take over schools, we're going to fix schools, but we won't give parents and kids an enforceable right to access to an effective education. And that's going to be, and until that problem is addressed, until the adults step up and say it's important enough to take some financial risk, because you do take financial risk when you give them that right, then this problem's going to continue.
Should we be rethinking it completely, though? You go back to Ted Eddy and Dan Challoner's study of 1993. They say you really have to rethink the physical environment. They should be in pods, 150 to 300 students. We did rebuild the Woonsocket middle schools at a cost of $80 million. Those Woonsocket middle schools were thought to be reinvented because it would have state-of-the-art. I think the buildings are 8 or 9 years old. They are amongst the worst
Yeah.
middle schools in the country.
See, the mistake we make is we go to the flavor of the month, and there are certain basic things that need.
Well, isn't I mean, there's just a lack of cohesion, discipline, et cetera. Is our governance also, I'll push back on elected school committees. If there was an elected school committee, the Providence Teachers Union be better organized, better funded, and would own all the elected seats instantaneously.
That's an issue with elected school committee.
East Siders don't care. They wouldn't fund it. Their kids don't go.
But with look what's happened with an appointed school committee. So you can't take politics out of politics, and so you have to ask the question: am I better off, getting the people involved? But we didn't get into the intervention. We, tracing my evolution, my thinking. When you read the report from Hopkins, it becomes very clear that the state has to intervene, and intervene in a very meaningful way. And when the state, intervenes, it's going to be there for a long time. Intervention is not a 1 or 2 year task. Intervention in school systems, when you fix a school system, is a decade-long event. And so it's intervention, it's bringing in authority, it's tearing up some of the work rules in union contracts. I'm not concerned about the compensation or the benefits. That's been negotiated fair and square. But some of the work rules and these contracts being more than 2-3 pages, has to be
The
torn.
Providence Teachers Union contract is a contract on top of a contract on top of a contract. It has to be 300 to 400 pages.
Well, and it should be 3 or 4 pages, and there should be some flexibility. Now, the legislature took steps in that direction this last year. They also did some dumb things with the Evergreen contract, but one of the reforms was to give principals more power, have more site-based management, which I think is a step in the right direction. So you have to get intervention in. You have to give the authority to the intervener, in this case, RIDE, to modify contracts, to do what's ever required. But also, and this is part of the political correctness in the state, and until we deal with the political correctness, all these problems are going to continue to exist. The argument was we couldn't have discipline in the schools because it discriminated against certain students.
Right.
Well, if a teacher can't exercise discipline in the school, it doesn't matter if the student is black or white or whatever. It affects everybody's ability to learn. So we got to get off the political correctness kick. We have to give the state commission a meaningful authority. We have to put in place a good oversight provision to make sure it's not business as usual. We have to be prepared to do it for a period of time. What the Hopkins report said, you talk about a breakdown of society. Yes, it was a breakdown of society, but somebody set the rules by which society operates, and we have to go back. The RIDE has to go back and revisit those rules, and I think they all tie back to political correctness. I think they tie back to the same kind of people that say it's okay to decriminalize illegal immigration at the borders. No, there have to be standards. There have to be tough standards. There have to be tough love, and if that's not part of the solution, then it becomes very, very difficult to change active behavior.
Should we be addressing this with a one-size-fit-all? In other words, should RIDE take over the school system? RIDE's brought over the superintendent from Central Falls. Wonderful guy, doesn't seem to make any sense.
He's a very capable guy.
Very capable guy. What's the results in Central Falls? If you look at the RICAS scores, the only community whose scores were less were Central Falls.
The question is whether we're going to focus on Providence right now. We're going to focus on the bigger problem, and that's a fair question. You look at what's happening in Providence. I look at Providence as a capital.
Listen, there are plenty of great NFL coaches who are wonderful guys who run a great practice and run a great press conference. Okay, but when you're 1 in 15 in back-to-back years, you get fired.
And then you find the quarterback. And then you just define the issue. It's that we had plenty of plans, but let's talk about why we haven't succeeded here. I chaired a commission for Bruce Sunland in whenever he was governor, 92 or so.
90.
Yeah, and it was called the 21st Century Education Commission. That report did a year before what Massachusetts proposed, had the same proposals. we didn't have the political will. We started, we stopped, and there were other subsequent, reports and recommendations that the same thing. So it didn't have the political will. We didn't have the political leadership.
Well, let's talk about the political will. The report comes out on Tuesday. On Thursday, the mayor of Providence is on an airplane to Hawaii. The report came out a week ago, a week and a half ago. This week, for the entire week, the governor of the state of Rhode Island is in Idaho from today through the weekend.
She missed Bristol too, didn't she?
She missed the 4th of July parade. I'll give her a pass on the 4th of July parade if she was working on education reform. But let's get serious here. Here's our two executive leaders in the state of Rhode Island who are elected to oversee this. There's no one else. There are no other elected chief executives that have a responsibility of this. It's not the general treasurer's issue. It's not the speaker of the House. It's the governor and the mayor of the city of Providence. Both of them seem, at best, give some word salad to the issue and get on airplanes to go elsewhere.
Well, yeah, I'm not going to defend because you don't win that argument. A mayor going to a mayor's conference or the governor going to one of her fundraising conferences, however she's networking, these days. But you do have people that you delegate responsibility to, and leadership delegates. Leadership gets the most out of these people. The governor and the mayor are not going to sit in a room for 24 hours a day just working on the nits and the weeds of
How
this.
about 24 minutes a day?
Well, the problem is they got to lead, they got to set direction, they got to delegate. Now, are they leading? Are they setting direction? Are they delegating? I don't know the answer to those questions, but I do know it's not two people, sitting in a corner office somewhere designing this. I think another thing that's of great concern, and maybe we'll know soon, I think the point that you make is a good point, but I wouldn't put it just on the mayor and the governor. It's a sense of urgency. We know what the problem is. Now we're going out and having all these community meetings, and fine, people need a chance to vent. I don't have any problem with that. But we don't need 2 or 3 weeks to put a plan of action together. We don't need 2 or 3 weeks to put together a transparency process so this plan of action can be monitored, et cetera. And so that's a leadership problem. It's not a problem going off to a conference somewhere. It's a problem of setting direction, delegating, and make sure it happens. That is what leaders do.
I guess the issue is, if you're going to say this is the number one issue facing the state of Rhode Island, the future of the state of Rhode Island, it seems to be already beginning to get lost in the rearview mirror.
And we're not dealing with, it's not, I don't know if it's getting lost in the rearview mirror or not, too early to say, but I do know this. We're not dealing with the fundamental problem. And the fundamental problem is, number one, guaranteeing education is an enforceable right. And they won't touch that with a 10-foot pole, hadn't touched it with a 10-foot pole for a long time. It's the Education Bill of Rights that we've discussed before.
Absolutely.
You've read about it. It's guaranteeing and holding yourself accountable for those types of things. And it's demonstrating a sense of urgency. Now, if the commissioner and others had said, okay, this is what the game plan is, and then the governor and the mayor, take off and go out of state and don't respond to that game plan, then your criticism is different. It's valid. But those are the kinds of basic things. The legislature said the legislature did their part to some extent. They dealt with site-based management, put some different governance parameters out there. Don't think it was near enough. Don't think it did all those things. But those are the fundamentals that you have to deal with. And you have to deal with the whole question that we are going to demand performance, and we're going to hold people accountable for lack or superior performance. And that's the kids, and it's the teachers, and it's the school administrators. No one is exempt from this. And I have not heard any conversation.
Well, let's go up one more rung. Providence School Committee, should they resign in mass?
If I was on the school committee, I would be embarrassed to stay there. If
Well, let's keep going up another notch. Board of Education.
Oh, I think you raise a very good point there. And it's not, see, you have to think about the Board of Education as both the commissioner's office and the board. But I think there are some really important issues that the governor needs to face. She needs to look herself in the mirror and say, I've appointed this Board of Education, and why didn't somebody come to me before? I suspected this. That's been what's been said. Where was the Board of Education? Why wasn't the Board of Education, running hard and say, we have failing schools in the state, and this is our...
Listen, there are plenty of times to blame the media. I'll give you a perfect example. When 38 Studios came in, GoLocal had just launched. We were critical of the deal. Once 38 Studios began, we fell asleep like everyone else until it crashed into bankruptcy, and then we did some good reporting. We did not do a good job, nor did any other media company, in covering 38 Studios' maturation during that 18-month period. In education, GoLocal, Channel 10, Channel 12, the Providence Journal have written endless numbers of stories about violence, absentee teachers, absentee students, conditions of the buildings. You could choke a horse with the number of stories just on the Providence schools and the condition of those schools. I had a suspicion. Read any publication you want. Pick one, and you'd have an understanding that these schools are horrific. They're the worst in the country. It wasn't a secret. It was just, it didn't fit the narrative of Rhode Island's recovery.
Well, I think, I can't, justify that. I think the adults let the kids down. That's what's happened. And the adults include some very powerful special interests that act in the legislature. And so let's see how serious the legislature, the governor, are. Clearly, I'm not going to go around here yelling everybody should resign or be fired, but clearly you need to make personnel changes. If the point that you were making, if I ran a business and I had a board of directors and my business was facing bankruptcy, my stockholders would be PO'd. I mean, I would have to make some changes on that board to keep my position. And I think the governor has to look at this from soup to nuts.
I think we're beyond bankruptcy. This is a product failure, that everyone who drank our soup got sick. That's really what this outcome is. Let me add one other thing. I think we're setting up this poor commissioner for failure. The only person responsible for school reform in Rhode Island now is this one woman from out of state.
Well, I disagree with that to this extent. I think the legislature put themselves squarely in the equation by what they did this session. I don't think they did enough, but I think what they did was moving in the right direction.
They moved in the right direction, but at the end of the day, the person who seems to now be responsible for all outcomes is one person.
Well, that one person reports to a board, and the board is appointed by the governor. So I would say that person is the point person, the lead person. Everybody can't be out on the point, but she'll only be as good as the support she receives. And oftentimes the support, it's the old question: are you leading an army, or are you just taking a walk? And if you're doing something and no one's following you, you're out taking a walk. If you're leading and people are following you, then you're doing something of consequence. And so I agree. You can't put it all on the commissioner, but that leadership is extremely important. Somebody has to have the experience and the ability to guide. But I think we have to look at the Board of Education and ask the question: do we have the right kind of people on the Board of Education? I think we have to ask, the question of, what kind of backing can we expect, from...
And do we need a new structure? I mean, it's pretty clear that the structure that was created a few years ago is a colossal failure.
I was a piece of... well, we had...
You already have your eye peeling off, so now you've got a board overseeing CCRI, RIC, and K through 12, and it's pretty clear that on the K through 12 job, that's mediocre at best.
But there's a couple of other things. Now, when the reorganization was done, it was done literally at midnight.
Yeah.
No one knew anything about it. And right after it didn't exist, I complained about it. I think Jennifer, I forget her last name, wrote a story about it in the journal of how this was done, and everybody knew it was a patchwork, ridiculous organizational structure. It got so bad that they had to call in a consultant who we work with to come up with a reorganization that didn't embarrass them by saying we had to change the whole law. They just jerry-rigged the system. And effectively, you had a board of education and a board of higher education who reported to a state board, and there wasn't a logic there. So yes, we have to look at the governance structure, and now's a perfect time to look at the governance structure because we've made a decision about URI, which I think was the right decision. And then the governor has to look at the people that are appointed to the board. And this is not all with the governor. It's a changing of who we are as a business community. When the Board of Education, or what we call the Board of, we had a Board of Governors for Higher Education and a Board of Education, when they existed, they had some really strong business leaders. Al Carlotti, ran it. Bob Flanders ran it. Sally Dowling ran it. We had people who were leaders in the business community as chairman of the board. And the business community, it's not just enough for a business community to say, okay, we're going to give X thousands of dollars to have John Hopkins come in and do a study. You got to get personally involved. She needs to go to the presidents of one of the major corporations in the state and say, Mary or Joe, you're going to do a service for the state. You are now chairman of the Board of Education for this state, and we expect you to devote your effort, your time, your skill, and your experience to helping us clean this problem up. And that's what's not happening here. I don't want to criticize the people on the board, but it's that you need the absolute top leadership, not just to give a few $1,000 to do a study, but to get involved. And until that happens, it's very hard to change culture.
Well, think of this. Providence School Committee was chaired by Bruce Sunland.
Right, remember that.
Right? So that's a significant change as to what the level of corporate involvement was in education in Rhode Island.
And part of the problem is we have to identify those corporate leaders that are interested. And this is a problem all over the country. This is not just a Rhode Island problem. It's a separation of management from ownership. When management and ownership were the same people, there was a sense of community. When management and ownership gets separated and you have to go to Memphis or Charlotte or Chicago to get a decision made about what your corporation can do, that's very different.
Yeah.
But the governor, this is where the governor's leadership becomes critically important, and she's networked, with everyone. Why not go to Hasbro or go to Amica or go to any one of the other major companies in the state, FM Global, I can mention, several, and say, I want you, you're the CEO of that company,
Yeah.
I want you to be my chairman. And that's happened in other states where they made a real effort to clean up education. And so that's really important to get that kind of leadership involved. And it's not just supporting a study and organizing a little group to say we're going to help make things better. It's actually rolling up your sleeves and getting in the fight and standing up to the union, standing up to parents when they're unreasonable, standing up to the ACLU when they want to go too far on loosening discipline in the schools, and have the political leverage to fight back on those things, which doesn't exist right now. And that's an important point. So it's how you structure, how you organize, how you find leaders, and that's the leadership function of the mayor and the governor. The leadership function of the mayor and the governor is not to design the solution, it's to direct what the solution should be, get the right people in place. It's the old thing that
Gary, you're totally confused. The strategy of leadership
confused.
in Rhode Island is when you have a significant problem, get on an airplane and get the heck out of Dodge, so you don't have to answer any questions.
I still take the Booz Allen thing is a little bit better. Booz Allen, when they teach leadership and management, this was years ago, they said, get the right people, get the wrong people off the bus. That's the first thing we got to do. Second thing is get the right people on the bus. Second thing we got to do. And the third thing we have to do is get the right people in the right seats on the bus. That's what leadership is about. And that's how you lead. And because what President...
So was getting on a plane to Hawaii part of the get the right person off the bus?
I would say I want to. Well, I'm not going. I'm not going to spend my time defending that. But I really want to focus on what needs to be done. I'm not. You can do the symbolic things about that all you want. But they're bigger fish to fry and bigger symbolic things to work from. If the person was sitting in Idaho, with other fat cats, or sitting in Hawaii with the mayors, and they were on the phone 3 hours a day, and they were making calls to the right CEO of the right company in the state and say, John or Mary, I'm not taking no for an answer. You're going to do this.
Right.
So it doesn't matter if the phone call was made, from a corner office.
Absolutely. Heck, Bruce Sunland once announced for governor from his horse farm in Virginia.
Yeah, and with a lot of flights to Jamaica. But the point was, sometimes in this state, we're our own worst enemy. We get caught up in these symbols without saying, no, the job
I
of,
do think part of leadership, though, is symbolic.
oh, yeah, of course it is. It's
And 2 days after you get ranked the worst school system in the country, you don't go to a mayor's conference in Hawaii. I'm not sure it's
Well-
hard to get people to buy in that you're serious about reforming schools when you're enjoying
Well,
one of the nicest
see,
vacations.
I would come at it a little differently, and I would say this: 30 minutes after that report came out, which you had some idea about, or 30 minutes before it came out, or you should have said, I'm going to take the leadership here, and I'm going to propose these charter changes, things that I could do. I'm going to do something about contract.
I think the issue with the mayor, though, is clearly there was a complete disconnect after 5 years of being in office and understanding what the condition of the schools were. When Johns Hopkins asked him what he would grade the Providence school system, he gave the school system a C.
Well, there's great inflation all over the state.
There is great inflation because Johns Hopkins researchers found that it was an F.
So now let me ask you, this is just a little bit of silliness here, but so if you're a student at Johns Hopkins, are there still gentlemen C's? Would they let you drop out of the course? They go you an F.
I would tell you this, that if I worked at the admissions office at Johns Hopkins, I would rethink any application that came in from the state of Rhode Island from any public school. Because I'd question whether or not that there is any academic rigor in the state
Well,
from any public school.
well, in light of what the Wall Street Journal has been writing recently, and it's not just about schools. A few months ago there was about,
We are now officially the Wall Street Journal's whipping boy.
No, we're not the whipping boy. We've done dumb things, and they're pointing them out. In the past,
Have they written this many times about California in the last 4 months?
I don't know. They probably have. But the question I would ask: have they written before what's happened this last 6 months? Have they written? They've written all kind of positive pieces about us. About pension reform, about a Democrat governor who understood business, and now they're starting to get data, and they're starting to see how we're performing, how our schools are performing, how our economy is performing compared to Massachusetts and the United States, and they're saying, well, what's going on in Rhode Island? We were very complimentary of this Democrat. It was a pro-business Democrat, and now after 4 years, 5 years, we're seeing the results. The school system is horrible. The proposed budget that was put in was just an old liberal tax and spend budget. How do we get tricked? But they're forgetting that inside politics, the people that read the Wall Street Journal, they're the movers and shakers who make a lot of business decisions. And so with all the good that we may or may not have done on Commerce Rhode Island, on promoting the state, it gets washed away
It does real economic damage to our reputation. The brand has been adversely impacted in the first 6 months of this year.
in 650 words.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things the governor needs to do is to be, balanced, certainly to crow about things that she thinks they've accomplished, but also to be equally as candid about things that we hadn't accomplished, and to be equally candid about, I'm going to go in, Commerce Rhode Island's been around for 4 years. I think they've done a good job, but we're going to bring in an independent evaluation, and I'm going to find out what's really working there well and what's not working, and I'm going to ask the question, why is our job creation below Massachusetts and below the United States, even though it's been increasing? Why? But more importantly, why is our productivity declining marginally while productivity in other places increasing?
Right.
Why is our growth in the state gross product, the state GDP, falling behind while the states are moving ahead? Now, does it have anything would have been worse without these programs? Are we putting money in the right places? Should we be doing things differently? And a lot of people have argued, this has been really the fundamental economic development argued in the state for a long time, is do you invest your resources in making the structural changes, or do you invest your resources in making deals? And you cannot avoid making deals, but you can't make deals to the extent of avoiding the structural issues that we've been avoiding.
With that, thank you very much for coming on in.
My pleasure.
Appreciate
My
it.
pleasure.
We'll be back tomorrow. Kate Nagel's got Go Local Live in the afternoon. I think she's got all world political scientists Jennifer Lawless in from the University of Virginia, who's getting quoted just about everywhere, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Vogue magazine, you name it. Lawless is there. And stay tuned to more on what's developing on a number of story fronts, Providence Schools being one. Secondly, the club murder that took place last weekend. Two of the suspects were arrested and charged today. There are warrants still outstanding for 6 others involved, as well as an investigative piece today about a very, very strange procurement contract that came out of the city of Providence. We'll see you back tomorrow. Josh Fenton, GoLocal Live. Have a great evening.